My father drove me 3 hours north through a snowstorm, carried my duffel bag onto a stranger's porch, hugged me for too long, and drove away before the man inside had even opened the door. I was 21 years old. It was 4 days before Christmas, and the stranger in that farmhouse was my own grandfather, a man I had not been allowed to see, speak to, or write to for 12 years. I did not know why we stopped seeing him. I only knew the rule. In our house, you did not say the name Dell, not at dinner, not in prayers, not even in the stories about my mother, and he was in half of them. So when my father set my bag down on those frozen boards and said, "1 week, kiddo, I need 1 week," I grabbed his sleeve like a child. "Dad, I don't know this man." And my father, who had not cried in front of me since my mother's funeral, looked at the porch light above the door and said the strangest thing. "The light's on. It's always on." Then he got in the car. His hands were shaking so hard he dropped his keys in the snow, and I told myself it was the cold. Friends, it was not the cold. Before that porch and I go one step further, I am going to make you 3 promises, so you know exactly what kind of story you are settling in for tonight. First, there was a door at the top of my grandfather's stairs that he kept locked, and on my 3rd night in that house, I found out what was behind it. And it was 12 wrapped Christmas presents. 12. One for every year I had been kept from him, each one labeled with my name and an age, 9, 10, 11, all the way to 20. He had never missed a single Christmas. I was the one who never came. Second, you are going to hear the sentence my father screamed at my grandfather beside my mother's casket, the sentence that tore this family in half for 12 years. And then you are going to find out what that sentence actually meant, and I promise you, it is not what my father thought it meant. It is not what you will think it means either. Third, on a shelf in that farmhouse, tucked behind a carved wooden wren, there was a sealed envelope with 1 word on it in my dead mother's handwriting. It had been waiting there for 12 years. It gets opened in this story in a hospital room on Christmas morning, and when you hear what my mother wrote, you may need a minute. I did. I still do, 25 years later. If stories like this one find you at the right time, do me one small kindness before we start. Tap like, subscribe if you want more nights like this, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and whether there is an empty chair at your table too. That is the only time I will ask. My name is Dana. I am 46 years old, I teach 4th grade, and I have spent 25 Christmases trying to find the words for what happened in that 1 week. Tonight I am going to try again. Stay with me. Every locked door in this story gets opened. To understand that porch, you have to understand what our family looked like before it broke, and the woman who held it together. My mother's name was Claire. She grew up on that farm, in that white house with the green shutters, the youngest daughter of a rural mail carrier named Wendell Byrne, who everybody in 3 counties called Dell. She used to say she was raised by a man who knew every mailbox and every birthday on 90 miles of gravel road. She left the farm for college, met a serious young accountant named Michael at a football game he did not want to be at, and by all accounts, she spent the next 15 years teaching my father how to be a person. That is not me being cruel. That is what he says. My childhood, the early part, the part I keep in a separate room of my memory, smelled like cinnamon and pine. My mother made Christmas the way other people make a living. Paper chains on the banister, an advent calendar she sewed herself, with a tiny pocket for every day, and every single year the drive north to the farm, 3 hours of my parents singing badly in the front seat, until the headlights swept across a white house with green shutters and 1 porch light burning. My grandfather would be on the steps before the engine was off. He never waited inside, never once. He smelled like sawdust and peppermint, and he carved little wooden birds in a workshop that used to be a milking barn, and he would press one into my hand each year like contraband and whisper, "Don't tell the big people." I had a shelf of them in my bedroom, a cardinal, a chickadee, a barn owl. Remember the birds? Everything I had, every soft thing in that childhood, had my mother's fingerprints on it, and half of hers came from him. Then I turned 8, and my mother started getting tired. Not dramatic tired, quiet tired. She sat down more. She hugged me longer, the way you hold something you are about to hand to someone else. That summer, she took me to Florida, just the two of us, a whole week, the ocean, ice cream for breakfast twice, and I thought I was the luckiest kid alive. I did not wonder why my father was not there. I did not wonder why she cried behind her sunglasses on the last morning while I buried her feet in the sand. You do not wonder about things like that when you are 8. You wonder about them when you are 46, at 2 in the morning, and by then the answers are in this story. She told us she was sick in September. She was gone by the first week of December. Ovarian cancer, stage 4, 36 years old. I was 9. I am going to skip the funeral for now, not because I do not remember it, because I remember it too well, and you need the rest of the story before you can understand what actually happened in that room with the flowers and the folding chairs. Here is what a 9-year-old understood. One day, I had a grandfather, and the next day, I did not. No goodbye. No explanation a child could hold. Just my father, gray as newspaper, saying, "We will not be seeing Dell anymore." And the way he said the name, like it burned his mouth, taught me never to ask twice. And after that, my father turned into a filing cabinet. I want to be fair to him because this story is going to be fair to everyone by the end, even the people who do not seem to deserve it yet. He did not drink. He did not disappear. He went the other way. He alphabetized his grief. He worked 60-hour weeks at the firm, and he ran our house like an audit, homework logged, dinners scheduled, feelings filed under miscellaneous. He came to my school things when work allowed, stood in the back, checked his watch, loved me in a language that had no words in it, only errands. Every Christmas after Mom died, we went to a restaurant, a nice one, tablecloths. He would order for both of us, and we would eat a fine meal in soft lighting like two colleagues closing out a fiscal year. And the whole time, every year, I would think about a porch light 3 hours north and never say it out loud. And here is a detail I need you to keep, because it matters later. Every December, from the time I was 10, a package would arrive at our house with my name on it, postmarked from up north. And every December, my father would take it from the mail pile, calm as taxes, write 3 words on it and hand it back to the mail carrier, return to sender. He never opened them. He never let me see them. The year I was 14, I got to the mailbox first, and I stood in the driveway holding a box wrapped in brown paper, my name in blocky pencil letters, and my father came out without his coat and held out his hand. "Dana, give it here." I said, "It's mine." He said, "It is not from anyone we know." That sentence. I handed it over because I was 14 and he was all I had. But I want you to hear what he did, because for 12 years I hated him for it. And by the end of tonight, you will understand it, even if you never forgive it. He erased a living man, and the living man kept mailing anyway, every year. Keep that in your pocket. We are going back to it. So now come forward with me. To the December I was 21. I was a junior in college, 3 semesters from a teaching degree, home for winter break in a quiet house with a plastic tree my father put up out of what I can only call administrative duty. And that December, my father was strange. I noticed it the way you notice a picture frame hanging crooked in a house you have lived in all your life. He was home too much. He watched me too long. Twice I caught him standing in the doorway of my bedroom while I folded laundry, just standing there, and when I said, "What?" he said nothing and walked away. He went to 2 appointments he called work things, wearing the tie he wore to funerals. And on the night of December 20th, he knocked on my door, sat down on the edge of my bed like the mattress might object, and said, "Pack a bag for a week. I'm driving you up to your grandfather's in the morning." I laughed. I actually laughed because it was the punchline to a joke 12 years long. I said, My grandfather, the one we do not have. And my father looked at his hands and said, I have something I have to take care of. I can't have you home alone for it. I was 21, friends. I had lived alone at college for 3 years. I could legally do everything but rent a car. I said all of that with the mouth on me I had at 21, and he took every word of it looking at the floor. And when I was done, he said one thing, Dana, I have never asked you for anything on faith. I'm asking now. And there was something in his voice, a hairline crack in the filing cabinet, that scared me quiet. I packed the bag. The drive north the next morning took 4 hours in the snow, and my father said maybe 40 words the whole way. I watched him at the wheel, this gray, careful man, and somewhere around the county line, the road signs started rhyming with something deep in me. Camden Falls, 31 miles. I knew that name. I knew the diner we passed, red booths behind fogged glass. I knew the grain elevator, the bridge, the church with the crooked steeple, knew them the way you know a song from the womb, and my chest started to hurt in a way I had no file for. The last time I rode this road, I was 9, and my mother was alive in the front seat. He turned up a gravel drive between 2 rows of bare maples, and there it was, White House, green shutters, one porch light burning at 11 o'clock in the morning. My father stopped the car and sat there with the engine running, both hands on the wheel, and for a second, I thought he was going to turn around, and God help me. Part of me wanted him to. Then he said quietly, like a man reading his own sentence, He knows you're coming. He has known for a week. You carried my bag up, you hugged me too long, you said, 1 week, kiddo, I need 1 week. And I stood on my dead mother's childhood porch and watched my father's taillights shrink down that gravel drive, red, then pink, then gone into the snow. He dropped his keys. His hands were shaking. It was not the cold. Behind me, the door opened. I turned around and looked at my grandfather for the first time in 12 years. He was 74 that winter. Tall once, you could tell, folded down a little now in a flannel shirt the color of dried cranberries and work pants with sawdust in the cuffs, white hair gone thin at the crown, hands like tree roots, and his eyes did a thing I have only seen a handful of times in my life. They went around my face slowly, one feature at a time, forehead, nose, chin, like a man checking a beloved photograph against the original. He did not hug me. I understand it now. You do not grab a bird that took 12 years to land on the rail. He just stepped back from the door and said, in a voice like gravel under slow tires, There's coffee. You still take it with too much milk, or did college fix that? I stood there with snow melting in my hair and thought, how does he know how I take my coffee? Keep that question. It has an answer. And the answer is one of the 2 or 3 moments of my life I would crawl back into if I could. The house hit me before the coffee did. That smell, wood smoke, peppermint, old paper, and underneath it something that made my throat close, because it was the smell of every Christmas before I was 9. The kitchen had not changed. Same yellow curtains gone paler. Same humpbacked refrigerator. Same long table with 10 chairs, and I want you to hold on to that number, because a man who has lived alone for years does not need 10 chairs, and there would come a night when I understood why he never got rid of them. A fat old beagle heaved himself off a blanket by the stove and came over to smell my boots. That's Biscuit, my grandfather said. He's a terrible judge of character, so don't let him flatter you. And that was it. That was the whole welcome. No speech, no tears, no 12 years, just a mug of coffee set down in front of me, pale with milk, exactly right, and an old man across the table drinking his black and looking at me like I was weather he had prayed for. I wish I could tell you I was gracious. I was not. I was 21 and furious at my father, and fury, when it has nowhere to go, spends itself on whoever is closest. I answered him in one word, bites. College is fine. The drive was fine. I'm not hungry. He took it the way a field takes rain, no argument, no flinch, And around 4 o'clock, he put on his coat and said he had to see to the shop stove, and I did what any exiled 21-year-old would do. I called my roommate from the phone in the hall, cupped my hand around it, and asked if she could drive up and get me the day after Christmas. I know, friends. You are allowed to be disappointed in me. The number for the farm was written on a card taped beside that phone, and under it, in the same blocky pencil, was a second number labeled Michael, work, my father's office. Hold on to that too. Everything taped beside that telephone matters before this story is over. Dinner the first night was beef stew he had clearly made ahead, and it was good, and I did not tell him so. We ate mostly quiet. Twice he tried a road into conversation. Your mother used to eat around the carrots and think I didn't see. I said, I don't really remember her at this table, which was a lie, and it was a cruel one. And I chose it because some hurt part of me wanted to see if he could hurt too. He set his spoon down for a moment. Then he said, well, and picked it up again. And that one word had 40 pounds of freight on it. I went up to bed early, and here is where I met the door. The farmhouse had 4 rooms upstairs. He'd put me in the guest room at the front, warm quilt, towels folded on the dresser like a bed and breakfast, and across the hall, facing the back field, there was a door with an old glass knob. It was locked. I only know because I tried it, snooping for extra blankets, and when the knob caught, something on the other side of that door caught in me too. Some strange animal certainty that there was more air behind it than a closet. At breakfast the next morning I asked, what's the locked room? My grandfather did not look up from his eggs. That one's not ready, he said. Not ready. What does that mean? A room not being ready? He passed me the toast and asked if I slept all right, and the subject was closed, gentle and total, like snow closing a road. Day 2 was the day the ice started to give, and it gave in the workshop. He went out after breakfast the way a man goes to a shift, and around 11 boredom beat pride, and I followed the shoveled path to the old milking barn with Biscuit huffing behind me. Inside, it was another country, a wood stove ticking in the corner, a radio playing carols at conspiracy volume, workbenches down both walls, tools hung on pegboard in painted outlines, every hammer home in its own white ghost, and birds. Friends, there were wooden birds everywhere. On shelves in flocks along the windowsills, cardinals and chickadees and jays and owls. Some raw pine, some painted so fine you expected the feathers to lift. There was a wall of shallow cubby holes behind his bench, each one holding a bird wrapped in tissue paper, each cubby labeled in pencil. Names, dozens of names. Simmons twins, Pastor Lang, June Pell. He carved for half the county, it turned out. Every kid on his old mail route who was ever sick, every widow, every funeral. A bird showed up on a porch. I found out about that from other people. Later, in a week, when I found out everything from other people, because the man himself would sooner have eaten the bench than mention it. He looked up, saw me in the doorway, and moved a stool with his boot. You can sand or you can sit, he said. Both jobs pay the same. I sanded. And something about sandpaper, the sound of it, the small circles, it unlocks people. We were half an hour into a comfortable quiet, first comfortable anything of the visit, when he said, without looking over, so did you switch back to teaching, or are you still telling your dad it's history? I stopped sanding. Because here's the thing. I had switched my major to education that spring, after 2 years of history, and it was a sore, fresh subject at home. And there was no way, no earthly way, this man should have known one word of it. I said, how do you know that? He kept his eyes on the wing he was carving. Same way I know your coffee, he said. I said, that's not an answer. He blew wood dust off the wing, held it to the window light, and for a long moment I thought the subject was going to close again. Snow over the road. Instead, he said, come here. I want to show you something. He walked me to the back corner of the shop where an old bureau stood under the window, and he opened the top drawer, and it was full of shoe boxes, 6 of them, tied with twine. Each one had a year range penciled on the lid. He put the top one in my hands, and his hands were not steady, and neither is my voice 25 years later when I tell this part out loud. "Open it," he said. Photographs. The box was full of photographs. Me. All of them. Me. Me at 11 in the second row of a school Christmas concert, slightly blurred, shot from the back of a gymnasium. Me at 13 coming off a soccer field far away, caught between 2 other families' shoulders. Me at 15 with a cast on my wrist, getting into my father's car outside the orthopedist's office. Me in a graduation gown from so far across the parking lot that I am mostly a smile and a tassel. 12 years, 6 shoe boxes. He had been there. That is what I'm telling you. 4 times a year, sometimes more, this man had driven 3 hours south, sat in the back of gymnasiums and the far side of parking lots, watched me live for an hour from a distance my father's anger had set, and driven 3 hours home in the dark. He never once let me see him. He never once made a scene. He just came and watched and left and mailed a package every December that came back every January with 3 words on it in my father's handwriting. I sat down on the stool because my legs were done holding me. I said, "Why didn't you ever just walk up to me? I would have. I did not know how to finish the sentence, and he let it lie there a moment. Then he said the thing that reorganized my entire understanding of the last 12 years. Because your father needed you more than I did, honey. And I promised your mother I would never make you choose." I said, "Promised her what? When? What are you talking about?" And I watched a door close behind his eyes, the same gentle total closing as the door upstairs, and he said, "That's a longer road than we've walked yet. Ask me again in a few days." Then he picked the smallest bird off the windowsill, a wren, plain pine, no paint, and set it in my palm and folded my fingers over it with both of his big, cracked hands. "Don't tell the big people," he said. And friends, I broke. 12 years of not asking, 12 years of return to sender, 12 years of a name we did not say, and it all came up at once. And I sat on a stool in a barn that smelled like sawdust and peppermint and sobbed like the 9-year-old who never got to say goodbye to this place. He did not hug me then either. He put one hand on the top of my head, the way you gentle a colt, and he said, "I know it. I know it." And the radio played "Oh Holy Night" at conspiracy volume, and the stove ticked, and that was day 2. That night, carrying wood in for him, I saw the envelope. The living room had a long shelf over the fireplace, and it was crowded. Photographs of my mother at every age, a clock, a candy dish, and a whole parliament of carved birds. And behind the painted wren at the end, tucked upright against the wall like something both hidden and enthroned, there was an envelope, old, softened at the corners, the way paper gets when it has been picked up 10,000 times. And on the front, in a looping, tilted, left-handed script that stopped my heart between beats, one word, Michael. My mother was left-handed, friends. Nobody else in this family ever was. I stood there with a log in my arms, and the whole room went quiet around that envelope, and I must have stared too long because my grandfather's voice came from the doorway behind me, low and even. "Not that one, Dana." I said, "That's her handwriting." He said, "It is." I said, "It says Michael." He said, "It does." I said, "Grandpa, what is it?" And he crossed the room, took the envelope down, and for 1 second I thought he was going to hand it to me, and then he opened the drawer of the side table and laid it inside, face up, gentle as a christening. He said, 12 years ago I made 2 promises to the same woman. That envelope is the one I haven't kept yet. And then he said, "Good night, honey. There's church in the morning if you want it." And he climbed the stairs like a man carrying more than his own weight. and I stood in that room with my heart going like a fist on a door. One word, Michael. Not yet. You will hear what was in that envelope. I gave you my word at the start, and we keep our promises in this family now. We learned that the hard way. Day 3 was the 23rd of December, and it was the day the past stood up and introduced itself. I went to church with him in the morning, mostly because saying no to this man was getting harder by the hour. The church was the one with the crooked steeple, and walking in beside my grandfather turned out to mean something I had not braced for. Heads turned, not a few, all of them. An old woman in a red coat put both hands over her mouth, and a murmur went down the pews ahead of us like wind through a wheat field, and I caught pieces of it. That's Claire's girl. Lord, look at her. That is Claire's daughter, or I'm blind. Friends, I had spent 12 years in a house where my mother was a photograph and a rule about not crying at dinner. And here was a whole room full of strangers to whom she was apparently still current events. The pastor shook my hand at the door afterward and held it a beat too long and said, "Your mother taught my daughter piano in this building." The woman in the red coat, who turned out to be named June Pell and turned out to matter, pressed my hand between both of hers, and her chin was going, and she said, "Honey, we have prayed for this porch to have you back on it for 12 years. 12 years. Everyone in this town could count." After the service, my grandfather got shanghaied by 2 men into a conversation about a furnace, and June Pell steered me to the diner across the road for hot chocolate, the red booths I had known from the highway, and this, right here, is where I started getting answers. June had been my grandmother's best friend, back when I had a grandmother who died before I was born. June had known my mother from the day she came home from the hospital, and June Pell, God keep her, had a lot less patience for locked rooms than the Byrne family did. She stirred her hot chocolate and looked at me and said, "How much do you know, child?" I said, "About what?" She said, "About why you stopped coming." I said nothing. Nobody has ever told me one thing. And her face did something complicated. Anger and grief and permission all negotiating, and the anger won. Or maybe it was the love. Sometimes at that age they are the same animal. She said, "Then I will tell you what half this county saw with its own eyes, and your grandfather can keep his silence and his sainthood both." Here is what June Pell told me in a red booth on December 23rd, while the hot chocolate went cold. At my mother's funeral in the fellowship hall of that same crooked steeple church, with 100 people holding paper plates, my father had gone up to my grandfather, quiet, too quiet, and asked him a question. June was close enough to hear the question. The question was, "How long did you know?" And my grandfather, who did not lie, even then, even there, said, "Since March." And my father went white, and then he went loud. Loud in a way that people in that town still talked about 12 years later. He screamed, "Since March. She was dying since March, and you knew, and I got told in September. You stole half a year of my wife." And then, with everyone watching, with me somewhere in that hall in a black dress eating off a paper plate, 9 years old, my father pointed at my grandfather and said the sentence that built the next 12 years. "You will never see my daughter again. You can keep the secrets, and I will keep her." And he took me by the hand and we drove home, and the packages started coming that next December, and they started going back. I sat in that booth and I could not feel my hands. Because you have to understand what I had assumed all those years, in the total dark my family kept me in. I had assumed my grandfather did something, said something drunk at the funeral, fought over money, over the will, over the burial plot, the ordinary ugly things families break on. It had never once occurred to me that the crime, the whole crime, the thing that cost me my grandfather and cost him me, was that he knew my mother was dying before my father did. I said, wait, how did he know in March? Why would she tell her father and not her husband? And June Pell looked at me for a long moment, and I watched her run out of permission. She said, "That part is not mine, honey. That part belongs to your grandfather, and you should ask him tonight, because none of us are guaranteed our winters." Then she patted my hand and told me my mother used to sit in that exact booth after choir practice and eat pie backwards, crust first, and I laughed and cried at the same time into a paper napkin with a poinsettia on it. I did not ask him at lunch. I did not ask him all afternoon while we cut a tree off the back field line and stood it up in the living room in the same cast iron stand they had used since my mother was a girl. I am not proud of the waiting. But you have to see the day I was having. It was the best day I had had in 12 years, and I knew the question would end it, and I was greedy for one more hour of pine sap and carols before the roof came down. We decorated that tree with ornaments out of a box marked C, and half of them were things my mother had made with her own hands at my age: a tinfoil star, a clothespin angel, a cardinal of painted dough with her initials scratched in the base. He hung the high branches, and I hung the low ones, and Biscuit reorganized the tree skirt 11 times. And if the story had ended right there, it would already have been the most important week of my life. It did not end there. After supper, he went out to bank the shop stove, and I went upstairs for a sweater, and the door across the hall, the locked one, the one that was not ready, was standing open. An inch. Lamplight on old wallpaper through the gap. He had been in there, that is all it was. He had been in there that afternoon, and the old latch had not caught. And friends, I know I should have waited. I did not wait. I put 2 fingers on that door and pushed. It was my mother's childhood bedroom. I knew it before my eyes finished the first pass. White iron bed, a quilt in flour sack colors, a shelf of ribbons and a dried corsage, a desk with school books still stacked, a hairbrush laid flat like it was set down an hour ago. He had kept it, all of it, the way you keep a room when keeping it is the only thing left you can do for someone. But that is not what buckled me. What buckled me was the bed, because laid out on that quilt, in 4 neat rows of 3, were 12 wrapped Christmas presents. 12. Different papers, different ribbons, 12 different Decembers of wrapping, some gone soft and dusty at the folds, and on every single one, a paper tag in blocky pencil. Dana 9, Dana 10, Dana 11, Dana 12. All the way along the rows, all the way up the years, to the last one, newest paper, ribbon, still crisp. Dana 20. Every package my father had written 3 words on and sent back up the highway. He had not thrown one of them away. He had not given up in year 5 or 8 or 11. Every January, this man had taken his rejected Christmas back out of the mailbox, carried it up these stairs, and laid it on his dead daughter's bed, like seed for a spring he had no evidence would ever come. 12 years of Christmas morning, waiting on a quilt. And one wall of that room, the wall by the window, was covered in my school pictures, mailed north once a year, I found out later, by June Pell, who had a cousin in our school district office, because even exiles have an underground. I heard him on the stairs behind me. I did not move. He came and stood in the doorway, and I braced for the closed door voice. "Not that one, Dana. That one's not ready." It did not come. Instead, he looked at the bed and at the wall and at me for a long time. And then he said, in a voice I had not heard from him yet, worn all the way through, "I told you it wasn't ready. It was supposed to have 13 by now. Friends, do me a favor tonight. If you have one of these people, one of the ones who keeps the porch light on for you and you have been meaning to call, put this story down when it is over and call. That is the whole sermon." I sat down on the edge of my mother's bed next to 12 Christmases, and I asked him, "Grandpa, how did you know in March? Why did she tell you and not Dad?" And this time, no door closed behind his eyes. He pulled out the little desk chair, sat down on it like it was church, and paid the debt of 12 years in full. Here is what happened to my family, as told to me by my grandfather in my dead mother's bedroom, 3 days before Christmas, while snow came down outside like the sky was emptying its pockets. In March of that last year, my mother found something. A lump where no lump should be, a pain that would not name itself. She went to the doctor alone, told no one, and the news came back the way it sometimes does, not a maybe, a certainty, advanced, everywhere, months. Chemotherapy might buy her a little time and take everything else. And my mother, 36 years old, sat in her car in that parking lot for 2 hours, and then she did not drive home. She drove north, 3 hours to this house, and sat at that long kitchen table with the 10 chairs, and told her father, and fell apart where no one she protected could see her do it. And then she asked him for the worst thing you can ask a parent for, time. She said, "Dad, I know how this goes now. The minute I say it out loud down there, I stop being Claire. I become the sick one. Michael will quit living to fight it. He will remortgage. He will rage at every doctor in the state. He will spend my last good months in waiting rooms and on the phone with insurance. And Dana will learn to be afraid in her own kitchen. I will get 6 months of being a diagnosis, or I can have one more spring of being her mother and his wife. Dad, I am asking you to let me have the spring." And my grandfather said, "No, I want that on the record, friends." Because 12 years of my father's version had this man down as a thief of time, cold and secretive. He said no. He begged her to tell my father that same week. He drove down twice in April to stand in her kitchen and give her the chance with him right there beside her. And both times she looked at him over my head while I did homework at the table, and both times he got back in his truck and drove 3 hours north with the secret still on him, because the only way to make her tell was to tell on her. And you cannot tell on your dying child. You cannot. There is no version of a father that does that, and if you think you would, I pray you never get to find out. So he carried it. March, April, May, June. He carried it while she took me to Florida and cried behind her sunglasses. He carried it while she painted the porch rail that summer and taught me to make her pie crust and wrote things at night he did not find until after. She told my father in September when she could not hide the weight loss anymore. And she told him a version with the dates moved, told him it was all new, all sudden, to spare him the arithmetic. And it worked until the funeral. It worked until one of her doctors, meaning nothing but kindness, took my father's hand in the fellowship hall and said, "I am so sorry, Michael. She fought this longer than most. We knew back in the spring what we were up against, the spring." And my father stood there doing the one thing he could not stop being, an accountant, and the numbers would not reconcile. And he crossed that hall to the only other person who never lied to him. How long did you know? Since March. Friends, hold both of these people in your hands for a minute. Hold my father, 39 years old, learning in one sentence at his wife's funeral that her dying had a spring and a summer he was not invited to, that the last whole season of her life was spent managing him like weather. All that rage had to go somewhere, and it could not go at her. She was in the casket, and it could not go at God. He had already tried. So it went at the man who was given what he was denied. 6 months of knowing, 6 months of goodbye. You stole half a year of my wife, and now hold my grandfather, who took that sentence in the face in public at his daughter's funeral, holding a secret he had begged not to keep. Who could have defended himself with one envelope, one sitting at home behind a carved wren, and chose not to, and we are almost to why. Who instead watched his son-in-law take away his granddaughter, the last piece of Claire on this earth, and said nothing, and went home to an empty farmhouse, and turned the porch light on. I asked him the question you are asking. I said, "Grandpa, why didn't you just tell him the truth? Why didn't you show him whatever is in that envelope? 12 years. Why?" And my grandfather looked at his hands for a while, and then he told me the second promise. "The night before your mother died," he said, "she couldn't talk much anymore, so she wrote. She gave me 2 jobs, and she made me shake on both because she knew me, and she knew a handshake was the only lock I can't pick. Job 1, never make Dana choose." However mad Michael gets, however long it goes, don't split the child, don't sue for visits, don't show up at the school, don't make her pick a side while she is growing. A girl with one parent cannot afford a war over her. Job 2. He stopped and was quiet for a bit, and the snow ticked at the window. Job 2, he said, is that envelope downstairs? She said, Dad, you give this to Michael when he can hear it. Not when he is angriest, not when you need to win, not to save yourself. You will know the day. And honey, for 12 years, there has been no day. A man cannot hear anything with his fists closed. I sat on my mother's bed with my whole understanding of my family lying in pieces around me, and I said, so what changed? Why am I here, Grandpa? Why now? And I watched him decide something. I actually watched it. Friends, a long look at the window, a long breath, an old man weighing a promise against a girl. And he said, it's late, and tomorrow's Christmas Eve, and there's one more part, but it's your father's part. And I made him a promise too, 4 days ago, on this telephone. First time I heard his voice in 12 years. Ask me tomorrow after he calls. And I should have pushed. God forgive me, I should have pushed right then. Because the call that came the next morning was not the call anyone promised me. Christmas Eve morning, the telephone in the hall rang at 7:20. I was awake. I had barely slept, my head too full of envelopes and shoe boxes, and I heard my grandfather's boots cross the kitchen, and I heard him say, burn residence, and then I heard nothing. Friends, silence has kinds. There is empty silence and there is full silence, and the silence coming up those stairs was so full it pulled me out of bed. By the time I got to the top step, he was saying, when? And then, how bad? And then he said a sentence that took the floor out from under me one word at a time. He said, does his daughter know he was having surgery at all? Surgery. His daughter. My father. I came down those stairs like a landslide, and my grandfather held up one hand, listening, and his face had gone the gray of old snow. And he said, we will be there in 3 hours. Tell him. Tell him, even if he can't hear it, you tell him Dell is bringing his girl. He hung up and looked at me and did not try to soften anything, and I will always love him for that. Dana, he said, your father has a heart condition. 3 arteries badly blocked. They found it a month ago. He was scheduled for a bypass operation the day after Christmas in the city, and that is why you are here, honey. There was no work thing. There was never a work thing. He didn't want you home alone if the news got bad, and he didn't want you at the hospital watching, and he couldn't ask anybody in the world to hold you through it except one man he hadn't spoken to in 12 years. I stood there in my mother's childhood hallway doing exactly what my father would have done. Math, the funeral tie, the appointments, the way he watched me fold laundry, the too long hug on this porch, his shaking hands. 1 week, kiddo, I need 1 week. He had not dumped me at all. He had been building me a shelter out of the only lumber he had left, his own swallowed pride. And I had spent 4 days up here being a stone to him on the phone. Because, oh friends, I have not told you that part, have I? He had called. Every one of those 3 nights the hall phone had rung after supper, and my grandfather would answer and say, she's right here, Michael, and hold the receiver out to me. And I took it and I gave my father one-word answers with my arms crossed. Fine. Yes, fine. Because I thought I was punishing a man who abandoned me on a porch. I was punishing a man who was staring at a surgery date, alone in an empty house at Christmas, calling to hear his daughter's voice in case it was one of the last times, and too proud or too far gone in his old habit of protecting me from everything true to say one word of it. The last thing I had said to him the night before was, whatever, Dad, Merry Christmas, I have to go. We're making cookies. We're making cookies. And now a nurse, 3 hours south, was saying words like emergency and moved up and unstable. Because here is what the morning call was. My father had not made it to his scheduled surgery. He had woken at 5 that morning, Christmas Eve, with a pain in his chest like a hand closing, and he had done one thing before calling the ambulance, and I need you to sit with what the one thing was. He called the farm. No. Forgive me, I have to tell it exactly because exact is all it deserves. He called the farm first before the ambulance with his chest coming apart, and the machine downstairs took it because we were asleep. And there was one sentence on that tape when we finally played it days later. Dell. It's starting early. Don't let her drive down alone, that was all. 2 commands, both of them about somebody else. From a man having a heart attack alone on his kitchen floor at Christmas. That was my father. Friends. That was my whole father, in 9 words, and I had been grading him wrong my entire adult life on account of he could not say soft things while standing up. The ambulance got him there in time, and they took him straight in, hours ahead of schedule, sicker than the plan, and that was the state of the world at 7:20 on Christmas Eve. My grandfather drove. He took the truck, because it was heavier in snow, and he drove that highway like the mail carrier he had been for 40 years, steady, both hands, 10 miles over, and not 1 mile more, while the storm came sideways at the windshield. Neither of us said much for the first hour. Then somewhere past the county line, he told me the last piece, the piece he had promised to save until after your father calls, and since the calls were all done now, he paid that one out too. 4 days ago, he said, that phone rang, and a voice I hadn't heard in 12 years said, Dell, don't hang up. I said, Michael, in 31 years, I have never once hung up on this family, and I'm not starting at my age. And your father was quiet a minute, and then he said, I have a heart thing. It's bad. They're going to crack me open 2 days after Christmas, and the odds are what they are, and I have nobody for her, Dell. Her aunts are her mother's stories to her. My folks are gone. If it goes wrong on that table, she has no one, and I did that. I built her a world with one door, and I'm the door. And then, honey, your father said the hardest sentence I ever heard a proud man say. He said, you kept the porch light on for 25 years, and I saw it every single Christmas. And I'm asking, is it still on for her? I sat with that one for a mile of snow. Then I said, what did you tell him? And my grandfather almost smiled, first one of that terrible morning. I told him the truth, he said. I told him the light's not for her, Michael. The light is for the whole family, whatever's left of it, whenever it figures out the way home. Bring me my granddaughter, and then come back for Christmas dinner, and I'll feed you both. And we'll bury the rest of it in the back field where it belongs. He said, your father laughed. Dana, 12 years. And I got a laugh out of him. Then he asked me not to tell you about the surgery, and I am old, and I have kept one secret for a dying child before. And I told him, no, sir, not again. Not that promise. Never again. You tell her yourself when she comes home to you, or I will tell her the day after Christmas. And that, friends, is what I would have learned on Christmas night if Christmas had kept to the schedule. Nothing in this story keeps to the schedule. Hold on, because I need to say one thing here, and then we will walk into that hospital together. If you have made it this far, you already know this is not really a story about a hospital. It is a story about how many years a family can lose, while everybody in it is busy being right. If somebody came to your mind just now, some voice you have not heard in 5 years, or 10, or 12, tell me about them in the comments. First name only. And then, when this story is over, you go be the phone call. All right. We got there a little before 11 on Christmas Eve morning. I will spare you the parking and the corridors and give you the sentence the surgeon gave us. He came out still in his cap, and he found the 2 of us standing up out of our chairs, and he said, he made it through. It was worse in there than the pictures showed. We did what we came to do, and the next 24 hours will tell us the rest. The next 24 hours, Christmas Eve and Christmas morning. They let me see him for 5 minutes at 2 o'clock. Friends, whatever you are picturing, make it smaller and whiter and quieter, and put more tubes on it. My father, the filing cabinet, the straightest back in any room, lay in that bed the size of a boy, gray as his own suits, taped and wired and ticking on the monitors, and the only thing in the room that was still him was the frown line between his eyes, like even under anesthesia he was auditing something. I held his hand, which we did not do. We were not a hand-holding family, and I put my mouth by his ear and said the thing I had been eating all morning. I didn't know, Dad. I'm here. I'm not fine, and you're not fine, and nobody in this family is fine, and when you wake up, we are going to try being not fine out loud for once. Nothing. Just the monitors keeping their cold little time. And then I said, Grandpa drove me. He's here. Dell is here, Dad. And the machine beeped on, steady, indifferent, and a nurse touched my shoulder, and my 5 minutes were over. The waiting room they put us in had 11 chairs and a television playing a parade with the sound off, and my grandfather and I set up housekeeping in the corner like refugees. And now I will tell you about the vigil, because it turned out to be the night my family got rebuilt in a room that smelled like burnt coffee by two people who could do nothing at all but wait. He talked. All night in that low gravel, my grandfather paid out 36 years of my mother, a coin at a time. How she broke her arm at 7 jumping off the haymow with an umbrella because a girl at school said it would work like a parachute, and how she climbed right back up the next summer to prove her math had just been off. How she kept pie crust in the icebox year-round and ate her pie backwards, crust first, and said the filling was the reward for honest work. How she drove her first suitor off by beating him at horseshoes 4 games straight and told her mother, if a man can't lose to me at 19, he can't be married to me at 40. How she called the farm every Sunday of her married life, every single one, and how the last thing she said on the last Sunday, when the talking was getting hard, was, Dad, check the porch bulb. It looked dim at Thanksgiving. Sometime after midnight, church bells somewhere in that city rang Christmas in, thin through the double glass. My grandfather looked up at the sound and then at the door of the intensive care unit down the hall, and he said quietly, well, Claire, look where your 2 stubbornest men are spending your favorite morning. Both under one roof. I know. You always did work in roundabout ways. And I laughed. Friends out loud in that terrible room, and the laugh turned into crying about halfway out, and he put his big hand on my head like in the workshop, and we sat like that a long while. At 4 a.m, a code alarm went off somewhere on the unit, running feet, a page repeated twice, and for 6 minutes, my grandfather and I stood holding the waiting room door frame, not breathing, 74 and 21, exactly the same age. It was not him. It was somebody else's Christmas breaking 2 doors down, God keep them. And we sat back down, and my grandfather's hands shook for 10 minutes afterward, and he let me see them shake, and that was its own kind of gift. Because here is what I understood at 4 a.m. on Christmas, in the worst chair in America. I had spent 4 days watching this man be a rock, and he was not a rock. He was a father, standing outside one more room he was not allowed into, waiting to hear whether he was going to lose the boy the way he lost the girl. He had buried his wife, and then his daughter, and then 12 Decembers, 1 a year, boxed in brown paper. And he had never once let any of it reach his face, because somebody in this family had to keep a light on, and the job was open, and he took it. Just past 7, Christmas morning, gray light coming up the windows, a doctor came through the doors and walked straight at us, and I stood up so fast the chair went over, and I could not read her face, and my grandfather's hand found mine, and friends, his grip. 74 years old. I felt my bones move. She said, he's awake. He's stable, his pressure held all night, his heart is doing what we asked of it. He's asking for his daughter. And then she paused and looked at her clipboard and looked at my grandfather and said, and he keeps asking the nurses whether somebody named Dell is still in the building. They let us in together. I have thought a lot over 25 years about why that room did what it did to all 3 of us. I think it is because a hospital bed strips a man of everything he has been hiding behind. No suit, no desk, no 12 years of silence to stand behind, just a tired heart on a screen, telling the truth at last in green light 72 times a minute. My father turned his head when the door opened, and he found me first, and his eyes did something I had not seen since I was 9 years old. They filled. He said, "Hey, kiddo," and I said, "Hey, Dad," and I got to the rail and put my hand over his, careful of the tape, and for a moment that was the whole conversation, and it was more than we had said in years. And then his eyes went past me, to the doorway, to the big old man standing half in the hall, cap in his 2 hands, wearing his church coat, not presuming one step further than he was invited. 12 years, a funeral, a scream, 100 return packages, a granddaughter grown up in the space between them. My father looked at my grandfather, and my grandfather looked at my father, and the monitor ticked, and none of us breathed. And my father said, "Hi, Dell," and my grandfather said, "Hi, son, son." Friends. That word crossed that room like spring crossing a field. My grandfather came to the other rail, and my father did something that cost him. You could see the tubes argue with it. He took his hand out from under mine and reached it across his own body toward the old man, palm up, an open hand, an accountant's whole confession. And my grandfather took it, both of his around it, the way he had folded my fingers over the wren. Nobody said, "I'm sorry, not yet." That came later, and it came plenty. The hands went first. In this family, the hands have always been ahead of the mouths. My father slept a while then and woke near 10, stronger, some color up, and that is when the talking finally came, and I want to give you the pieces of it in the order they fell, because the order is the story. First, my father looked at me for a long time, and he said, "You know why I couldn't tell you?" And I started to answer, and he shook his head. "No, let me. I have been writing this in my head since the anesthesia wore off. Dana, when your mother was dying, she managed me. She rationed the truth like sugar in wartime, because she knew what I do with truth. I turn it into projects, and she wanted a spring instead of a project. I hated her for it. I have hated her for it for 12 years. Quietly in the same drawer where I loved her, and the two of them rattling around in there together is what you grew up in the house with. I am sorry." And then, kiddo, the doctors handed me a bad heart and a date on a calendar, and do you know what I did? He laughed, and the laugh cost him too, and he put his hand flat on his own chest. "The exact same thing," he said, "the exact same thing she did. I rationed the truth to protect you, and I told myself it was strength, and it was her move all along. I stole it from a dead woman." The apple and the tree, Dana. Even when the apple only married into the orchard. And from the other rail, my grandfather said, "Dry as toast. Well, Michael, took you 12 years and open heart surgery, but you finally worked one of them out." And my father laughed until the incision made him stop, and a nurse put her head in to see what was wrong with us. And friends, what was wrong with us was healing, and it looks ridiculous from the hallway. Second piece. I asked my father the question from the truck. "Dad, the porch light. You told Grandpa you saw it every Christmas. How?" And my father was quiet a good while, and then he gave up his last secret, and it was the one that undid me all over again. "Every Christmas night," he said, "after our dinner, after you were asleep, or later, once you were away at school, I got in the car and I drove up there. 3 hours. I parked out on the county road at the end of the gravel, past the mailbox, where the maples hide the car. And I sat there, and I looked at that porch light, and I tried to make myself walk up that drive. 12 years, Dana. 12 Christmases, 6 hours of driving each, to sit in the dark for 20 minutes, looking at a light bulb. And every year I put the car in gear and drove home, because I could survive being wrong, but I did not think I could survive saying it. Sit with that, friends. All those Decembers I sat at a tablecloth restaurant with a man I thought had a spreadsheet for a soul. And after he paid the check and saw me home, he drove 3 hours into the dark to look at his dead wife's porch light, and 3 hours back and showed up at work the day after Christmas with his tie straight. We do not know. We think we can read the people at our own table, and we cannot read them at all, and the proof of it was ticking away on a monitor in front of me. And my grandfather, at that, got up and walked to the window and stood with his back to us, and his voice, when it came, had rust in it. He said, "The 26th of December, 4 years ago." There were boot prints at the end of my drive, by the maples, big ones, and tire tracks half snowed over, and I stood there in the morning telling myself, "Old fool, it's a hunter, it's a lost salesman." I swept my porch and I went back inside and I said to the dog, "Biscuit one of these years, one of these years. And here you both are. And it took this." He turned around and he looked at the two of us and he said the sentence I have carried ever since, the one I will hand my own children someday when they are old enough to need it. "Pride is a porch you can see the whole road from," he said, "and it is the loneliest place a man ever stood." And that, friends, is when he reached into his church coat. I had wondered. Somewhere in the folding of that terrible night I had wondered, and then lost it in the fear. But when we left the farmhouse in the dark on Christmas Eve morning, my grandfather had gone to the side table drawer in the living room, the drawer he had laid it in, gentle as a christening, and he had put my mother's envelope in the inside pocket of his coat, and he had carried it against his chest through the whole vigil, through the storm, through the code alarm and the shaking hands. Because a promise 12 years old had finally come due. You give this to Michael when he can hear it. You will know the day. He knew the day. He crossed the room and he laid it on the blanket over my father's heart, one word up in that looping left-handed script, Michael. And he said, "She wrote it the night before she left us, son. I have kept it 12 years, and I have read the outside of it 10,000 times, and I do not know one word of the inside because it was never mine. It was always yours. She just needed me to hold it until you could hear her." My father looked down at his own name in his dead wife's handwriting, and friends, this man with 3 repaired arteries and a monitor keeping his score, he went to pieces, and it was the most alive I had ever seen him. He could not open it. His hands would not do it, the tape and the tubes and the 12 years all arguing at once, and he looked at me and he said, "Kiddo, please." So it was me. That is how it came to be, me who opened my mother's last letter, Christmas morning, in a hospital room with her father on one side of the bed and her husband on the other, and read it out loud to the 2 stubbornest men she ever loved. I am not going to give you every line. Some of it belongs to us, and you would agree if you had been there. But I will give you what the 3 of us have never stopped saying to each other since, the parts that rebuilt this family, and I know them without looking, the way you know a hymn. It began, Michael, my love, if you are reading this, then my father decided you were finally ready to hear me, which means you are probably angrier than you have ever been, or sadder, or both. And either way, I wish I could put my hand flat on your chest the way I do, one more time, right where it hurts. It said, "You know by now that I knew in March. Be angry at me, not at Dad." I want that in writing, in my own hand, where you cannot argue with it, you great arguer. He said no. He begged me to tell you. He drove down twice to stand in the kitchen so I would not have to say it alone, and both times I looked at him over our daughter's head, and both times he drove home carrying my secret because I asked him to, and a father cannot refuse a dying daughter, so if you must audit someone, Michael, audit me. I chose the spring, it said, and here is what I chose it for. Do you remember the cherry tree that April and the picnic where Dana lost her first tooth in the apple, and laughing until you sat down in the wet grass in your good pants? You thought that was ordinary time. It was not. I was already dying, and I watched you love me without managing me, and I got to be your wife instead of your patient for one more season. And Michael, I would choose it again. I stole nothing from you. I stole 6 months of grief from you, and I hid them where you could not find them, and I gave you a spring in their place. And someday, when Dana is grown, you will understand it was the best trade I ever made. And then, friends, the last part. The part that was not for my father at all. It said, now, 2 instructions, and you will follow them, because they are the last ones I will ever give you. 1. Whatever year it is when Dad finally hands you this, take our daughter home to the farm for Christmas. I do not care what has happened between the houses by now. That porch is where I am, Michael, not the cemetery, the porch, in the light my father never lets burn out. Christmas at the farm is the single thing I most wanted to give her, and I am asking you to give it for me. And 2, look after Dad. He will be old by the time he lets you read this, because he is more patient than both of you put together, and he will have kept every promise I wrung out of him, and someone needs to make him stop climbing ladders. Yours always, whatever the calendar says. Claire. I looked up. The room was very quiet, just the monitor, keeping its steady green time like it had all along, 72 small mercies a minute. My mother had known. Sit with it, friends. 12 years ahead, in the last hours of her life, with a pen she could barely hold, she had known her men, known exactly how they would break and exactly how long they would stay broken. And she had built the repair and left it with the one person stubborn enough to wait for the day. Take our daughter home to the farm for Christmas. I was already there, Mama. Your father drove me, in the truck, through the snow, 10 miles over and not 1 mile more. What happened after that, friends, is the part of the story where the days finally stop needing numbers. So I will give it to you the way the years gave it to us. My father left that hospital on the 3rd of January, and he did not go home to the empty house with the plastic tree. The cardiologist said he needed 6 weeks somewhere with somebody, and my grandfather stood up in that office wearing his church coat and said, well, that's settled. I have 10 chairs and a dog. And it turned out the argument was over before my father found his footing to start it. So my father did his recovering at the farm. The accountant and the mail carrier under one roof, 2 old widowers of the same woman in a way. And I stayed through the whole of my winter break and watched the strangest, softest thing. They did not become talkers. Do not let me paint it prettier than it was. They became doers of small things, side by side, which for men of their make is the same sentence spoken fluently. My father kept the wood stove fed to the exact degree the doctor allowed and not 1 log more, and audited the farm's insurance, and found $400 a year of savings, and was pleased about it for a week. My grandfather taught him to sand, and on New Year's Eve, with my father cleared to climb stairs once a day, we made his once count. We took him up to the room that was not ready. He stood in the doorway of his wife's girlhood bedroom, the way you stand at the edge of deep water, and he looked at the white iron bed with its 12 wrapped Decembers in their 4 neat rows, and he read the tags, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way to 20, and he understood in one look what he had mailed back year by year with 3 words in a steady pen. And he sat down on the edge of that bed and put his face in his hands, and my grandfather sat down next to him, and I sat on the other side. And that is where we opened them, friends. That very night, all 12, oldest first by the light of 1 lamp shaped like a ballerina that had been my mother's when she was 6. Dana, 9, was a carved cardinal and a note in pencil, blocky letters for the shelf, to start it over. Grandpa. Dana, 10, a chickadee, and $2 for the collection plate or the candy counter. Your call, honey. Dana, 11, a barn owl and a ribbon he had kept from my mother's county fair pies, thought your mama would want you to have a blue one of hers till you win your own. On up the years. A pocket knife at 13 that made my father, the accountant, wince, 12 years too late. A little cedar box at 16 with a robin on the lid for whatever a 16-year-old keeps, no questions asked from up here. Every year, a bird. Every year, 4 lines of pencil from a man on a porch, writing to a girl at an address he was not welcome at, certain to the bone she would sit on this bed and read it someday. 12 birds went home to my shelf that week, back with the ones from before, and the flock has been together ever since. And Dana, 20, the last box, the crisp ribbon. It was not a bird. It was my mother's recipe tin, the one that had stood on the farm kitchen shelf my whole childhood, and inside, in front of the pie crust card, in fresh pencil, one line. The kitchen is yours now, too. Come learn the crust. It's high time, Grandpa. I learned the crust. That week, and every Christmas week after, and I will tell you about those, because this story does not end in a hospital or even in a bedroom of wrapped years. It ends the way my mother ordered it to end, in writing, in her own hand. It ends on the porch. My father sold nothing and confessed nothing publicly, and never became a soft man, I want to be honest with you, to the end. He remained a filing cabinet. But the cabinet got a new drawer, and the drawer had the farm in it, and Sunday calls in it, north this time, and every single Christmas for the rest of my grandfather's life, my father's car came up that gravel drive between the maples on the morning of the 23rd, this time all the way up, past the mailbox to the house. The next Christmas, the first full one, all 10 chairs at the long table were filled. I want you to know that, because I told you to hold on to the number. My grandfather at the head, my father at the foot, me, June Pell, the pastor and his wife, the 2 furnace men from that first Sunday, a neighbor's boy home from the army, and my roommate, the one I had once begged to come rescue me from this exact house, who took one look at the place and never quite left either, and is my kid's godmother now. 10 chairs. He had kept 10 chairs through 12 years of eating alone, friends. Some people keep faith in a drawer. He kept his around a table, set for a family that did not exist yet, and it came. It came. I should tell you about those 6 weeks because they hold 3 small scenes I have never once told without stopping in the middle, and I owe you all 3. The first one is the tape. I promised you the tape. It was the second week of January, my last days before the spring semester called me back, and the 3 of us were in the farm kitchen after supper. And my grandfather, drying a pot, said, "Michael, there's a message of yours still sitting on that machine. I never had the heart to erase it, and I don't have the stomach to keep it. It's yours to decide." So we stood in the hall, the 3 of us, around that little machine like it was a preacher, and my father pressed the button, and his own voice came out, thin and early morning and frightened, from the worst hour of his life. "Dell, it's starting early. Don't let her drive down alone." 9 words. My father listened to himself nearly die in 9 words, and then he reached out one steady accountant's finger and pressed erase. And he said quietly, "That man didn't know how it comes out. No sense making him live in the hallway." Then he put his hand on my shoulder, one moment, on his way to bed. We never spoke of the tape again. We did not need to. The second scene is the bird. Somewhere in week 4, cleared for light activity and board past endurance, my father followed the shoveled path out to the workshop, the way I had, and Biscuit went with him, the way he went with everybody. And my grandfather looked up and moved a stool with his boot and said the same 6 words he had said to me. "You can sand or you can sit." My father sanded. And then, because he was my father, he was not content to sand, and by the time I came home for spring break, there was a new bird on the long shelf over the fireplace. A cardinal, lopsided, heavy in the tail, one wing higher than the other, the beak honestly a little alarming. It sat there among 50 of my grandfather's perfect ones, and I picked it up and turned it over, and on the base, in pencil, in my father's bookkeeping hand, it said, "First attempt messy under it." In blocky letters, my grandfather had added one word: keeper. That crooked cardinal sits on my mantle today, friends, in the middle of the flock, and of every bird in this story, it is the one I would run back into a burning house for. The third scene is the grave. My mother is buried down south in the city, in the plot my father chose in the fog of that terrible December. And in 12 years, my grandfather had visited his daughter's grave exactly twice, both times alone. Both times, I learned, on her birthday in the morning, before anyone else would think to come. The 1st of May, her birthday, falls when the cherry tree blooms. And that spring, my father drove north, picked up my grandfather at the farm, and drove him 3 hours south, and the two of them stood at her stone together for the first time since the funeral that broke them. I was not there. This one came to me secondhand from June Pell, who had it from the pastor, who had it from my grandfather, the way everything true in a small town travels, in threes. But June says my grandfather told it like this. We stood there a while, and neither of us is a talker, you know, the two of us. And then Michael took a clipping of the cherry tree out of his coat, wrapped in a wet paper towel and a bread bag, very orderly, you know him, and he planted it by her stone and packed the dirt with his shoe. And he said, there. Now she has the spring here too. And we drove home and split a plate of eggs at a truck stop. And I will tell you, June, it was the finest conversation I never had. That cherry cutting took, by the way. It is taller than my father now. The cemetery board sent a letter once, something about unauthorized plantings, and my father, the most rule-abiding man alive, wrote back one line and copied his attorney. And the tree stands there to this day. And I consider that letter the single most romantic thing he ever did. And then it was the next December, the first full one, the one with the 10 chairs. And there is one more thing about that Christmas I held back, because it belongs here, at the end, with the birds. Christmas morning, with the whole crowd of us in wrapping paper up to our shins, my grandfather stood and went to the tree and took down one more package from behind it, where it had been hiding all along, against the trunk. New paper, crisp ribbon, and a tag in blocky pencil, Dana, 21. The 13th, Friends. The room went quiet because everyone in it knew the arithmetic of that bed upstairs by then. Everyone in that town knew, and I sat with the box on my knees a long moment before I could work the ribbon. Inside was a wren, not plain pine this time. Painted every feather, fine as breath, the little cocked head, the whole small courage of it. And I knew what it was paired to, because its plain twin was standing on my shelf at home between a cardinal and a barn owl. The note said, the plain one was for the girl who came to my porch. This one is for the woman who stayed. Both are true, both are yours. Grandpa. And then it said one more line, and if you have listened this whole night, you have earned it word for word. It said, no more tags with numbers on them, honey. From here on out, I get to hand them over myself. And he did. 9 more years, hand to hand, no more brown paper, no more highway, no more return to sender, a bird a year straight into my palm with both of his folded over it. And if there is a richer way to be loved on this earth, friends, I have not met it. My grandfather lived 9 more years, 9 more Christmases if you count the way he counted, and he did. I graduated and taught 4th grade 2 towns from the farm on purpose and got married in the back field by the tree line in October when the maples go up like brush fire. He built the arch for it himself, and I have a photograph of him and my father carrying it out across the stubble together, one end each, arguing happily about load-bearing. 2 men who once could not share a funeral parlor, sharing the weight of a door-shaped thing for me to walk through. He met both of my children, held my son at 3 days old with those tree-root hands, and said, well, look here, Claire, and did not explain himself, and did not need to. He died at 83 in October, in the porch rocker, with Biscuit, the second, asleep on his boots, and a half-sanded goldfinch on the rail beside him. The neighbors said the light was on when they found him, though it was 3 in the afternoon. He had started leaving it on all the time by then. I asked him about it once, the waste of it, teasing, and he said, "Honey, at my age, you don't know which trip up the drive is somebody's last one, so the light stays on, and that is the whole economics of it." He left the farm to me and my father, jointly, one line in the will, and the lawyer looked confused, and the two of us laughed until we had to step outside because of course he did. Joint custody of a porch. One more promise keeping itself from a man in the ground, for a woman longer in the ground, both of them still raising the two of us all the same. So now you know the whole week, and most of what the week turned into, and I am 46, and it is December again as I tell you this. Tomorrow, I will pack our van with kids and casseroles and one very ancient recipe tin, and my husband will drive, and we will go north on that same highway through this same kind of snow. And when we turn up the gravel between the maples, my headlights will sweep across a white house with green shutters, and there will be an old man on the steps before the engine is off, because he never waits inside, never once anymore. My father is 73 now. He keeps the farm books to the penny and the wood stove to the exact degree, and my mother's cherry tree pruned like a rich man's hedge. And every evening of his life, whatever the hour, whatever the weather, he walks out and turns on the porch light with his own hand. I asked him about it last year, the ritual of it, and he stood there with his finger still on the switch, and he said, "Kiddo, your grandfather kept this light on for me for 25 years, while I sat in the dark at the end of the driveway. Leave the light on and keep the chairs and learn the crust. Merry Christmas from all of us at the farm, and whoever it is you have been meaning to call, call."